being in the darkness, transitioning from darkness to space, to the stars, and then seeing the white light in the distance and steadily moving towards that light while I'm hearing God saying these things to me, while I'm praying, and while I'm communicating telepathically back and forth with my wife.
Stephen LaRussa, welcome to Passion Harvest. Really, really looking forward to our conversation today. And thank you for being on the show.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you.
I'm fascinated by your profound experiences. I'd love to start with your shared death experience.
Okay. Yeah, the shared death experience, which actually happened not too long ago. As of this recording, it's less than a year ago. Happened in October of 2024, and basically it was a shared death experience. My wife was out of town. She came back in town. We live in Reno, Nevada. We decided to go to Lake Tahoe to kind of sit and rejuvenate spiritually, sit at the lake, do some stargazing, and just kind of reconnect spiritually. So basically, this happened. We had a room for the night. This happened in the hotel room. It started around 8 or 9 p.m. My wife and I were talking. We were awake. We had the TV playing in the background. We were talking. I was actually laying on the bed, and as I'm laying on the bed, my wife's standing to the side, on the side of the bed, on her side of the bed. I begin to get severe pains on the left side of my body, all on the left side of my chest, running up and down my neck, running through my left side through my arm. And it's funny because during the day I had little pains on the left side during the day, but I didn't want to mention it to her. I didn't want to alarm her. But it had happened a couple times during the day, and I thought, that's odd. But once we got back to the hotel, that's when it intensified, the numbness and the tingling and the severe pain and the my heart beating 1,000 miles a minute. So as I'm laying there, I tell my wife, I said, now I've never had a heart attack. I've never had any symptoms of a heart attack, but I've read about them. So I was familiar with them through just research or whatnot. So I said, oh my gosh. I said, I'm dying. I'm having a heart attack. So the funny thing about it is that whole day there was a strange feeling in the air, and I can't describe it as good or bad. It was just weird. It was like something's going on. There's an energy here that I can't explain. This was all day leading up to this. So I had felt something going on all day. I had no idea what it was. So as I told my wife that, your first thought when you're going through something like this is that person's going to call 911, right? They're going to get on the phone, call an ambulance. She didn't do that. Now, as we talked about it later, she later told me that when I said that to her and she saw me there and I'm starting to shake and convulse a little bit, my body's starting to shake. She said that she heard a voice that told her to lay beside me and get in position. So she had this calm come over her. And she said that voice was God telling me to lay down and get in position, because we both talked about this. It was like, there's no way that you could have been that calm in that situation unless God had put that on your spirit to be calm, lay down and get in position. So she laid down next to me. We're both laying flat on her back. She's on my right side. She's holding our arms are bent like this, and she's got my arm cusped like this. So at this time, I begin to go into darkness. So I'm in complete darkness. When something like this happens, there's no concept of time. I have no idea how long this went on. I have nothing. As I'm going through darkness, I begin to go through space. I'm amongst the stars. I'm in space. Now, during this event, a few profound things happened. One, I heard the voice of God 3 times during this event. My wife heard the voice of God twice. The first time she heard it when she was told to lay down and get in position. So as I'm going now through space, my soul's being pulled. I can feel myself getting weaker. I'm kind of in between the physical realm, and the spiritual realm. Now, the thing about this is that I'd been through my 2-year spiritual awakening before this in Dark Night of the Soul. So it's funny because my NDE is a little different because most NDEs spark a spiritual awakening. My NDE happened after my spiritual awakening of Dark Night of the Soul. And a lot of that is because I began running from my calling. I began reverting from what I was called to do, my mission in life. And this, I kind of call this, I've come up with a term for this. I call this kind of a spiritual spanking. The universe is we're going to get you back on track. So as I'm going through space, I feel my soul being pulled. I began praying to God. The first time I heard God's voice is when he said, "You've wasted enough time." That was clear in my head. And I felt horrible because I knew exactly what it meant, because I knew that I had been running from my calling and reverting back to my ego self out of fear-based thinking, limited thoughts. What are people going to say? I'm going to be judged. Who am I to do this? Do I know enough? Am I good enough? It's going to be too much work. All those things that keep us from stepping into our calling. I had done that. After I'd done all my studying, got all my certificates, everything. When it was time to go out there, I stalled. So this NDE was a direct result of basically a spiritual spanking to get me back on track. So when God said that you waste enough time, I start praying to God. God, I'm sorry. I know exactly what you mean. I know my calling, everything. I start praying, calling for Jesus, promising God I'm going to do this. Now, the funny thing about it is if I'm slowly drifting through space, I see the white light in the distance that, so many people see during NDEs. And I've known all this because, like I said, I've been through my awakening, my dark night of the soul. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I could feel my soul being pulled. So I'm praying. Now, the interesting thing about this is that my wife later on told me that while I was going through this intense pain and this heart attack, she was feeling the pain, the symptoms also. She started feeling pain on her left side. She said it wasn't severe as yours. She said there was a period that she was going through space also. She was going through space. Now, at this time, we start communicating telepathically. We start talking to each other. She can hear all of my prayers. I can hear her praying for me to God, and I'm praying to God. I could hear everything. So there was a point where God said, "You've wasted enough time." I'm praying, I'm begging. This goes on. I'm steadily, slowly approaching the light, feeling my body being pulled. The second thing that God said to me was, all this information and all this knowledge I've given you, and this is what you're doing with it, which I felt horrible. I felt horrible. God wasn't judging me. He wanted me to look at myself. I felt like, you know what I mean? I want you to look at yourself. I want you to get you back on what you're supposed to be doing in your mission. So as I'm traveling through, he says that to me the second time. Now, at this time, I'm begging, I'm pleading. At one point, I'm tired. I'm ready to give up. I'm like, okay, none of my prayers are working. I'm continuously heading towards light. So I said, okay, I said to myself, oh, I'm just going to give up and give in. I'm just going to let it go. I hear my wife praying telepathically because at this time I'm convulsing and shaking so much I can't talk. I'm in so much pain. I'm not even there. Well, I'm halfway there. I'm being steadily pulled away from the physical realm. So when I told myself I'm going to give up, my wife says to me telepathically, "Stephen, don't give up. Fight, fight, fight." I hear her voice in my head. So that gave me a second win. So I began praying again to God, calling out to God. Now, it's funny, during this time, after we talked about the incident, afterwards, my wife said that God said to her, "And why should I leave you here?" And she only said one word. She said, "Jordan," which is our son. So she heard God's voice twice during this event. One to tell her to get in position and lay down, and also when he asked her why I should leave you here. So as I'm getting closer and closer to the light, and I'm praying and everything I'm doing, God, I promise to fulfill my mission. It can't end like this. Give me another chance. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't care about anybody's judgment. I don't care about anybody's validation. All those things that kept me from doing this. You know what I mean? All those limited thoughts, low vibrational feelings. So I'm getting closer to the light. As I'm getting closer, and I'm literally on the verge of death, where I'm like, this is it. I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm right upon the light. I telepathically, I said to my wife, Wanda, help me. And I don't know why I said this. I'm looking back on, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If God's not answering my prayers, how could she help me? But that was like a last ditch resort to ask her to intercede or to help me. As I did that, she sat up in the bed and she began speaking in tongues. Now, we've been married 25 years. I've heard her speak in tongues in light language maybe once or twice before. So it wasn't strange to me. But I'm so immersed in my situation, begging God for my life, not even fully there. I barely hear it, and I can't even focus on it because I'm in such immense pain, and so much is going on with me. So the third and last time I heard God's voice was when He said to me, Stephen, be quiet and listen to your wife. As soon as I did that, I was brought back. I was able to focus on her. I was able to all of a sudden hear her. As soon as that happened, she stopped speaking in tongues, and she started speaking in African language fluently. She started speaking and chanting in an African language. Now, neither one of us knows any other language but English. You know when you hear another, you know when you hear Spanish, or you know when you hear Italian. But even though you may not know what the words mean, you know what it is. So I knew it was an African language. I could tell by the tone and by the nature of the words. So she's speaking, I assume, obviously, praying for me in this African language. I'm in amazement. I'm like, oh, how is this possible? This can't be. How is she speaking in another language fluently? She transitions from one African language to a different African language. I could tell it's still African language, but it's different. Maybe from a different country in Africa. I have no idea. She's speaking and she's chanting. This goes on, and she speaks and she chants in 3 different African languages, and then she transitions to Indian language, and she starts speaking with her hands up, chanting and speaking in these languages. So I kind of simplified the story. I toned it. There's a lot to it, but I'm giving you the meat and potatoes. I'm in awe. I can't believe this. It doesn't make sense. So that was when she started speaking in those languages, when she interceded, and I'm assuming prayers. That's when I was taken from the brink of death, literally on the doorstep of the light, and I was brought back into my body. I was fully back into my body. It wasn't until she interceded, all the prayers to God, I called on Jesus, I promised to fulfill my calling. Nothing brought me back until she sat up and began speaking in these languages. So as she does this, I'm back within myself. I get up off the bed, I'm pacing. At this time, I'm getting all these spiritual, what I call divine downloads, all these things that I'm going to be doing, all these things that are going to happen in my life. Just an influx. My third eye, I literally had a throbbing and had a headache in my third eye for 2 weeks after this event. I was so opened, this opened me up so much spiritually. I had a lot of synchronicities and signs and messages from the universe before this, because like I said, I went through my spiritual awakening, my NDE, but it intensified after this event. It really opened up after this shared NDE. So I began pacing the floor. I'm getting all these downloads. I'm literally telling God, please ease up. It's too much for me to take. I look over at my wife. She's still sitting up in the bed, and her eyes are wide open, and she's like in a daze. Like, you ever seen by like under a trance? I guess that's the best way to put it. She's under the spiritual trance that she's in. So I didn't want to say anything to her. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't know what she was going through. She finally snaps out of it. I begin talking to her. She didn't remember anything at first. I said, do you know what you just did? Do you know what just happened? You and I spoke telepathically. We were communicating to each other through our thoughts telepathically, and you spoke in other languages. And she didn't remember it at first. I was all hyped up. Obviously, you can imagine in this situation, excited. Oh my God, blah, 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 this, blah, blah, blah. She said, Steve, calm down. Give me a second. I need to recoup. She slowly started to remember speaking. So I asked her, what were you saying? She said, I have no idea what I was saying. I don't speak those languages. How do I know what I'm saying? I don't know African. I don't know Indian. So that's, in a nutshell, that was the gist of my NDE. And my NDE, the shared NDE was, from what I understand, very rare because one, it's funny. My wife was gone for a week and a half. And I told her, if God wanted to put this NDE on me by myself, he could have done it because you were out of town. He purposely waited, the universe waited until you got back so you can experience this with me. And it was funny how God said, Stephen, be quiet. Look, I want you to listen to your wife. He wanted me to be fully focused and to be able to hear her speaking these other languages. And from what I get from that is kind of like a testimony. I want you to know this is real. I want you to hear this. I want you to know that you're supported, that all those limited feelings, low vibrational thoughts, all that fear-based thinking that's keeping you out of your calling, that you are supported by the universe. And this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I basically I was like, okay, I've got to get to what I'm getting. And my NDE wasn't for the purpose of an awakening or elevation in consciousness or anything like that. It was to get me to step into my calling and for me to realize you're supported. This is your calling. Let all the limited thinking, low vibrational thoughts go so you can step into your path and purpose.
Wow, Stephen. Well, firstly, thank you for sharing your incredible experience with such openness and honesty. Um, you know, it just, as you were talking, I was thinking about your wife, the power of love.
Yes. Yes.
That
Yes.
really
Yes.
is it's basically what makes the world go round.
Yes.
Um, so she doesn't speak these other languages.
No, ma'am. No, 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 not, oh, we've been together 25, we've been together 26 years, and we've been married for 24. And she's,
Congratulations.
yes, thank you. She's never spoken another language. Like I said, the only thing that I heard that was familiar to me was her speaking in tongues, which I had heard a couple times. But like I said, when she transitioned from that into other languages and speaking them fluently and chanting like she was almost like native to them. And of everything that I went through during that NDE, hearing the voice of God, traveling to the light, and basically, God not and it's important to understand, God not judging me, God asking me things so I can look at myself. You know what I mean? So you need to judge yourself. You need to understand that, stop limiting yourself. Stop worrying about what other people think. Step into your calling. Worry about what your family, worry about validation and acceptance or judgment and all those things that keep so many people literally from doing what they're called to do, or their path, or their passion in life that they don't do. And the ego self convinces them and tricks us into reverting from and not doing. So this was a call to step into a calling. This NDE wasn't for the purpose of a spiritual awakening like it is with most people.
So you said you had a dark night at the soul, and I want to ask you what you
Hmm.
define, how do you define that in a minute, but you weren't following your calling. What is your calling? Because everyone's looking, so many people say, what
Yeah.
is my purpose in life? What is my calling?
Right, right. My purpose and my calling, and I almost attribute it to what I agreed to before I incarnated here, I feel like, is to do my part to raise the light and the vibration, to help people come into their true selves, to help people to unlimit themselves, to help people to get past the mental, social construct, the religious dogma, the limited thinking, the low vibrational thoughts, feeling, and emotions that keep us from truly connecting to God, to source, to the universe. There's so many things that keep us trapped and keep us handcuffed. And a lot of people, most people do unconsciously, and they don't even realize the harm, is to make people self-aware. And also to have people realize is that, and this is not to, and I always say this is not to down, it's not about downing or judging any religious institution or anything. I've studied them all. I consider myself an omnist. I believe there's a truth in every religion. There's truth to be found. But it's not to depend on a middleman or an institution for your connection to God. A lot of people have been programmed that you need this clergyman or pastor or priest or whatnot, or this institution to connect to God because you're not good enough or you're not able to do it. And it's been conditioned people that you have to go here, you have to hear this man, you have to do these things. And my thing is that there's a lot of people that have tried this and have done it. If it works for you, God bless you. Keep doing it. By all means, however you're getting a connection, get a connection. But a lot of people that have come to me say, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I don't feel the connections. I'm not getting the signs, the synchronicities, and the messages. What's going on? And there's a lot to be learned from this, and there's a lot that people need to know. So I'm just here to help people come into their own power, and not to tell them what to believe, not to tell them what their path and purpose is, because that's not for me to do, but to make them self-aware of the things that are limiting and hindering their connection to source in the universe.
So if one's looking for a deeper connection with their soul or with their source, or lost that connection, what are your tips or advice to reconnect?
Well, there's so many things. There's so many things, but I believe that the main thing is basically having people change their perception and their paradigms. You cannot you cannot truly and get the optimal connection to your spirit team, to God, to source, to the universe, if you're still thinking and conducting yourself and looking at things through a man-made worldly lens, through a logical lens, through a physical perspective. And most people do that. They try to connect spiritually, but they're still looking at things through a limited lens or through a fear-based lens. And it's about changing your perspective to line up more with spiritual principles. I'll give you an example. A lot of us judge. Judgment is one of the biggest things of judging people, and looking at this person. What's wrong with them? Why are they doing that? They're crazy. They're this, they're that. And what people don't understand, those little judgments, which are anti-universe, anti-spiritual, anti-universal principles, they block and hinder our spiritual connection because they're low vibration. And if you're operating like that, you need to switch your perception. And just for judgment, when I tell my clients, when you see somebody doing something that you perceive as whatever, and you begin to start labeling them, you have to change your perspective and look at them. Okay, that's where they're at on a soul level. They have to learn a certain lesson. That maybe that's part of their path or purpose. There's something that they need to get out of that, but that's not for me to judge it. And you could always look at people and say, you know what, I wouldn't do that, or that's not something that would work for me. And that's fine if you put it in that context. But when you start putting it judgment, they're wrong, they're bad, they're evil, they're this or that. Those little things like that will block and hinder your connection. So if you just get done judging somebody, and I tell my clients this, then you go off and you try to meditate and you try to go earth, or you try to go do a sound bath and you try to do spiritual practices to connect, but you're not dealing with those low vibrational thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We have to learn. I attribute it to a car. When you take a car in for an oil change, they drain the oil first, the old oil, right? Before they put that new oil in the car. A lot of people are trying to put new oil on top of old oil. So we have to be cognizant of these things that block and hinder, so we can have an optimal connection to the source and to the spirit, to your spirit team.
Yes, because you mentioned during your NDE that God was saying something along the lines of all these negative thoughts you were having.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we can
Right.
get in a cycle of negative, whatever it might, different scenarios, different stories.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get out of that pattern of negative thinking? This person hurt me, or whatever the scenario may be, the job or the family. How do we elevate
Right.
ourselves from that cycle?
Well, one of the biggest things, and I'll give this example, is having expectations of people. And it's funny, little things like this that I want to bring to people's attention that they don't understand. And I dealt with this with a client, and I'll use that example where she has had, a negative or rocky relationship with her mother. And she was telling me that she had all this good news or some things that happened in her job, and she was expressing these to her mother. and she was expecting a certain kind of response from her mother. Oh, baby, come here, give me a hug, and that's wonderful, and blah blah blah. And when she didn't get that response, because that's what she expected, or that's what she thought, how she thought she should respond. Now, what that does is that expectations of others leads to other low vibrational thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Now you're angry. Now you're sad. Now you're resentful. And a lot of people try to justify it by saying, well, you know, I would do this for them. Or if they told me this news, I would say this for them. Or if they asked me this, I would do it for them. So we have to stop putting those expectations of what we would do and what we think is quote unquote right, the right thing to do, and put those on other people. And when they don't respond in that fashion, we're hurt, we're sad, we're angry, we're resentful. So expectations snowball into a whole bunch of other low vibrational thoughts, feelings, emotions that people don't understand and don't realize. So my client, she started to get angry and resentful. My mother doesn't care about me. Why is she acting like that? I give her some good news and she barely shrugged her shoulder, and I was expecting her to do this and that. And I said, you have to release the expectation. You have to detach. You have to detach from that expectation, because now that expectation has snowballed into 3 or 4 other low vibrational thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And whenever you tell somebody something, a situation, what you're going through, you ask them for a favor, whatever it is, you have to go into that with no expectations or insistences of the outcome. Because when you have those and they don't pan out to what you quote unquote think is right, or I would do it for them, so they should do it for me, that's one thing I see a lot with people that people don't really realize consciously that they're doing.
Expectations can, as you've said, can really hinder our spiritual growth and our happiness. You
Yes.
mentioned after you were conscious, after your experience, that you were walking around and receiving all these downloads. What sort of downloads were you receiving?
Well, these were a lot of downloads. They weren't downloads about, a lot of people get downloads about the future and what's going to happen in the world and, stuff like that. It wasn't anything like that. For me, it was downloads of things that I would be doing. I was told that, little things like, well, they're not little, but things like I would be teaching, at a community college, a spirituality class, that I would be traveling all over the world talking to people, that I would be doing a lot of podcasts, that my wife would begin to join me in this, which I didn't see coming. Just the fact that, you're going to help a lot of people that are in need, and you're going to help to change people's paradigms and perspectives so that they come into their true power and they realize who they really are. And, it's funny because I've had things happen that I know this is guided by God, because now, I just found out a couple months ago, I will be teaching a class at a local community college here in town, in Reno. I will be speaking on June 7th at Spiritual Awakenings International online conference.
Congratulations.
Yes, 40 different speakers from 12 different countries around the world. I just got invited to one of the biggest spiritual conferences in New York City, in the heart of New York City, for November. All these things are starting to open up. And these are not things that I could have done by myself. These are things of God. A lot of things God was telling me back in October when this event happened are slowly starting to manifest and starting to come. And it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot for me. And some of those things I was actually told when I was getting these downloads. I was actually told not to tell my wife some of these things because she needs to come into this for herself. So there's a couple things that I did not tell her. And oh my God, then she later on down the line, she would mention it or it would come up. And I was like, you know what, babe, I got to tell you, that's one of the things that I was told not to tell you, that you needed to come into yourself, that you need to realize for yourself, not me telling you and giving it to you, that you had to come into your own time and it had to be revealed to you for your confirmation. So yeah,
So you were almost shown not specifically, but future premonitions for your future.
Yeah, for my future.
Which is incredible.
And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't, a lot of people get these worldly events and these messages of from other
Humanity
beings,
and yes.
humanity, other beings and spirit. But for me, it was specifically, here's what you're going to be doing. Here's what you're meant to do. And you know this as a pod show host and the many people that you talk to, you know, each NDE, spiritual awakening, dark night of the soul, is different for everybody. There is some common things like seeing the light or traveling through space and whatnot, some common things, but everybody needs that experience for their own personal reasons. You know what I mean? So
Of
my personal reasons
course.
happen to be my stalling, my running from my calling, and who knows if I hadn't had that NDE, who knows how far I would have reverted back to my old self and my ego self, but it
Mm.
was needed. It was needed to get me back on track.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What does God feel like? What does God feel like to you? It's hard to describe in words.
Well,
Sorry, I'm answering your
you,
question, but
no, it definitely is. Now, I will tell you this: a few months before the NDE that it happened in October of 24, I went through a outer body experience, not an NDE, where I was told all these things, the meaning of life. Steve, it's not this materialistic stuff that you're chasing. It's not this wealth. It's not this status. And all these images started coming to my head of poor people and places, starving children, and images of fancy cars. It was like a movie. This happened, like I said, a few months before the NDE, where I was surrounded by the light. I've heard this happen. I've heard people talk about this, and you can't really understand it until you experience it. This immense love that was being showed to me that was so intense, I literally had to ask God to stop. It's too. I felt like I was going to explode. I think that's the best way to put it. So I went through that where I was in the light. I was amongst the light. I was getting all these downloads. I was balled up on the floor in tears, in the fetal position, and I couldn't take it. The NDE was a different story. NDE was a different story. The NDE, like I said earlier, was a spiritual spanking. We're here to support you. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You've gone through. I'd already been told what I was supposed to be doing at this time. That's the funny thing about it. It had already been revealed before the NDE. And the funny thing about it, I got my certificates. I did my studying. I studied quantum physics and Dolores Cannon and Brian Wise and Michael Newton, and read all these books. And it got to the point where I was just reading. God was like, okay, it's time to step out there. And as soon as I got that message, I stopped. I didn't want to do it. I was fine in my house or taking my classes and reading and researching and doing all this stuff. But once it was time for me to put myself out there so that I could help people, that's when everything came in. Who are you to do this? You're not good enough. It's too much work. It's too hard. All these things. And I started to kind of revert. So it was interesting that, I almost equate this NDE to a parent. When a child does something wrong and they send them to their room and the parent comes in there with a belt, that I needed this tough love. I needed this reassurance from God to get over that final hump, to get to what I was supposed to be doing.
yes. You mentioned Jesus as well in your
Mhm.
near-death experience. What's Jesus like, or what was the
Well,
experience with Jesus?
well, I didn't. Well, the funny thing is I didn't experience anything. I didn't. In my NDE, I've heard a lot of NDEs where people would, you know, see Jesus and Jesus would talk to them. For me, I called on Jesus and I didn't get any images or see Jesus. Like I said, my experiences was being in the darkness, transitioning from darkness to space to the stars, and then seeing the white light in the distance and steadily moving towards that light while I'm hearing God saying these things to me, while I'm praying, and while I'm communicating telepathically back and forth with my wife during this whole exchange.
Wow, and our humanness, it's so hard to understand. It's all, I mean, so many things are all happening at once.
Yes. Yeah. It was it was very intense. It was very needed. And the great thing about it for me was a lot of people when they wrestle with their NDEs, a lot of people take years before they even talk about it, and they're trying to figure out what it means and
Yes.
why did I go through it. And they go through their spiritual awakening, and after they go through their spiritual awakening, then they feel comfortable years later talking about it. Well, a lot of people ask me, how are you able to talk about it so soon? And that's just because I went through it. So I knew exactly what God was talking about. I knew why it was happening. And I was like, after I came out of it, I was like, okay, God's giving me a second chance at this. He brought me to the brink of death and then brought me back. And I'm like, okay, wow, this is heavy. I've got to
Yeah.
now what that does now is that fear of being judged, that need for validation, that worrying about being accepted, all that, it's removed all that from me now. It's removed all that doubt, fear, and low vibrational thoughts and emotions that was keeping me out of my calling. That NDE was put there to remove that from me so I can
Yeah.
truly step into what I'm
Yes.
supposed to be
And
doing.
what inhibits so many of us in this world, and it's
Mhm.
so wonderful that you're just being you. I just want to ask you, you mentioned the dark night of the soul. What does that mean?
Well, for me, the spiritual awakening, for me began with, and I've always been open to paranormal and NDEs and other species, aliens and life, and I've always been in tune with all that. But for me, it started getting very intense where I started really delving into it on another level, questioning what was going on, questioning, my spiritual awakening was brought on by, like a lot of people, a few severe crises in my life that all hit me at the same time. My wife and I were separated for about 5 or 6 months and on the verge of divorce. I had invested literally my whole life savings into commercial property, commercial real estate, apartment buildings, which I had a lot of shady and deceitful contractors and property management that took advantage, and lost a lot of my money in that. My son was going through a transitional period, and due to downsizing, I lost my job. All of that hit me, and it broke me down. Like, so God, this is the purpose of life: living 70, 80 years, if you're that lucky, to chase, and constantly trying to fill these voids, and they're never filled. They're never good enough. So when I went through all that, but the dark night of the soul is that battle between the ego self and the spiritual self, which we intensify the dark night of the soul in the process because we don't know what's going on, or most people don't know what's going on, as I did. So as the universe and God is trying to get me to break away from that and trying to close these doors, we we tend to want to keep those doors open. So I fought that. I fought to keep certain people around and do the same things, and go to the same events or whatnot, things that really didn't resonate with me anymore. But I didn't want to let them go because there's a fear of, if I let this go, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? What's next? This is all I know. And it's funny how people will hold on to things that don't work just because they're familiar with it. So I had gotten to a point where um, I didn't want to be here anymore. It's like, this doesn't feel like home. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I was at a point where, literally, and I'll say this, that I wanted to die, but I wasn't suicidal, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I wasn't, I didn't have the guts, or wasn't crazy enough to do it myself, however you wanted to perceive it. But I didn't want to be here anymore. I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. So what I did was I reverted back to my roots, which is a Christian background. I went to the church. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I went to the church, talked to the pastor about it, and didn't find any solace, any understanding, any relief. If the things that he was saying didn't resonate with me, and said, no, that's not it. There's something more. That's not it. So I, it, 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 it almost broke me down. It broke me down to the point where I thought I was going through a midlife crisis. I thought I was going crazy. I thought that, I fought it every step of the way, which only intensifies the whole process.
What's your advice to those of the audience that perhaps are going through unwanted experiences, whatever they may be, and
Yes.
feel like they're broken?
Well, the thing is that, one, is that a lot of times that brokenness and that doubt is the beginning of of how the soul tries to get in contact with you. So if you're feeling that feeling that there's something more, that there's something going on, that I don't feel right, I don't feel connected, I feel broken, that's a sign from God, from the universe, from your higher self trying to awaken you. So I don't want people to necessarily think that's a bad thing, because we have to go through the darkness to get to the light. There has to be a period of darkness. It's like a seed. You put it, it's in the darkness before it emerges. So before we emerge spiritually, there has to be a death of the old self. So I tell my clients, there's going to be some relationship shifts. You're not going to be able to work where you worked. You're not going to be able to have the same friends. They may fall off. And a lot of people, like I said, when the universe tries to close that door, take your foot out of that door and let it close. That's part of the process. That's part of it. Changing your perspective and looking at things through a more spiritual lens, which will help connection. So that brokenness is a part of the rebuilding process. But it's important to recognize that. And if you go along with the flow of that brokenness, let that relationship go. Stop doing that. There is something out there. Instead of being afraid of or mourning what you're losing, get excited for what's to come, because it's coming. But that's part of the process that we have to go through to get there.
Stephen, you're inspiring. You are.
Oh.
Where, I will leave a link, but where is the best place for people to connect with you?
The best place to connect with me is through my website, which is Spiritual Alignment SL. So it's Spiritual Alignment, then my initials SL.com. There they can find out more about me, about what I do, and about how I'm here to help people come into their true selves, and to help people that are on the verge, that have that little inkling that there's something not right, that there's something more, that I don't feel fulfilled, that I'm not getting connection. You don't have to stay in that state. You don't have to stay in that state. There is something more. There is a way to get connected. There is a way to emerge from all that, but you have to take the first step, which is releasing all those things that don't serve you anymore. And like I said, the main reason we don't want to release is out of fear of not knowing what's coming next, fear of unfamiliar circumstances. And a lot of it is fear, well, where do I go and what do I do if I let go of who I think I am, which is not really who you are, right? That's a false identity. That's a construct. So you have to be willing to do that. And the thing that I've learned in going through my experience is that who can you turn to? There's not a lot of family. Family didn't understand. Friends don't understand. A lot of the people in the religious institutions may not understand and don't teach this type of thing. They don't teach true connection, or at least I haven't been to any that have. They don't. So we need more people that are out there, that are true, that are genuine, that have good motives, that have inspired, and that have, and most of all, that have lived it, that have been through it. You know what I mean? That have been through it. God, one thing that God told me, it doesn't matter what you read, it doesn't matter what degrees or certificates you have. All that is great. All that is necessary. That's great. But nothing beats experience and going through it. And I just want to let people know that there is more, that there is a better way, that God has something for you, and that what you're trapped in, you don't have to stay trapped in.
Again, you're so inspiring. I love the way you express that, and perhaps, asking yourself the question, well, am I the same person that I was before? Who am I? And
Right.
I mean, I love that. What's your advice for those people that are looking to find their purpose or their passion in life?
Well, people that are looking to find that, the first thing that you have to do is you have to unlimit yourself. You have to unlimit yourself. I tell people that one of the biggest things about connecting to the universe, to your higher self, to your spirit realm, so you can start receiving those answers, is to unlimit yourself. You have to unlearn everything that you've learned. You can't be so concrete in what you believe and what you think and what you feel, because just because you think it, feel it, doesn't mean that it's a reality. And a lot of people are so concrete, stuck and immersed in what they think is real and what they think is true, they don't want to get outside that box. And I tell people, the universe is unlimited. The spirit world is unlimited. How can we truly connect with an unlimited entity, source, realm, if we're limiting ourselves? You can't. You're not aligned. So you have to do the things to be able to get those answers, to be able to get those synchronicities, signs, messages, you have to align yourself with the universe. So you have to release the dogma, the mental and social constructs, who you think you are, the judgment, the expectations. You have to look at things and change your perspective and paradigm to look at it more through a spiritual lens. And the more you align yourself with a spiritual way of perceiving, the higher and better your connection is going to be. Those answers will start flowing to you. You release those blockages. You release those hindrances. You release all that's keeping you handcuffed, basically, from getting those answers. And I tell people, when I take on clients, my main question to them is about, are you ready to unlearn what you learned? How stuck are you in your beliefs? Are you ready to unlimit your thinking? Are you open to be able to perceive things through a different lens? Or if you're concrete, this is the way it is, and nope, this is the truth, and I can't help you there. I can't help you until you're ready to be unlimited. If you keep yourself constricted in that box, you're going to stay constricted, and you're going to constrict your connection to the universe.
So true. Stephen, I mean, I'm so inspired. I know I've already said that. Um, I've loved having you on the show. On a final note, is there anything else you would like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you today?
Well, I just want to share all those people that are experiencing doubt. If you're experiencing doubt when it comes to things, doubt has been categorized as a bad thing, and especially in the religious community. And I went through that when I was going through my awakening, through my dark night of soul. Why am I doubting this? I must be wrong. I'm sorry, God, for doubting what I've been told. You have to realize that doubt is the beginning of a spiritual awakening. That doubt, you have to start doubting things to be able to unlimit yourself. So don't fight that doubt. You have to go with it when it comes to this. But a lot of times in religious institutions, they make us feel guilty about doubting. I was told that as a kid, don't you doubt that word. Well, Uncle, this doesn't feel right. What does this mean? I've said that to my family. Don't you doubt. God doesn't like doubt, that you don't have any faith. No, that doubt is a part of your soul telling you that something's not right and trying to get that switch, turn that switch on from you to switch your perspective and your paradigm to a spiritual thing, to a spiritual way to perceive. So I just want to tell everybody out there that you're not crazy. You're not alone. There's people out there that are there to help, that have been through it. But I just tell them, be careful in who you deal with. Make sure that their motives and their intentions are genuine and they're pure. And just understand that the universe has to close doors in order to open them. So, and it's another thing real quick. The people love when the universe opens doors and opportunities. They love it. But I tell people, you have to embrace those doors that the universe is closing also, and just be just excited about those closed doors, and allow the universe to do it. Allow the transition, because the more you fight that transition, the more the suffering, the more the heartache, the harder if you're going through a spiritual awakening, you create the dark night of the soul. My wife went through a spiritual awakening. Hers was much more gentle than mine because she went with everything. She didn't fight it. She went with it. Me, being stubborn, fighting it. I prolonged it. I intensified it. So just realize you're not alone. Seek out someone that can guide you, that has experience, that can help you eliminate a lot of those hindrances and blockages so you can get your answers.
Stephen Narusa, thank you so much. I've got a big smile on my face for being on
Mhm.
Passion Harvest today. Gosh, you're so easy to interview and perfect, perfect. Thank
Oh,
you
thank
very
you.
much for being on the show.
Thank you, Louisa. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, and continue with all the great work you're doing. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Mhm.